Yes, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome Lotta Löfgren hit. Lotta Löfgren is Sweden's only professor of sexology and one of the very few in the world. And what she is going to talk about is not talked about enough. I've been trying to get Lotta to come here for years, and I finally succeeded. So very welcome, Lotta. We are so keen to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much.
Welcome everyone to this big talk session on sexuality and, Welcome everyone to this big talk session on sexuality and people with intellectual disabilities. As you just heard, our speaker today is Lotta Löfgren, who is a professor in the field of sexology at Malmö University. Again, I encourage you to ask questions. You should do that using the ITAKOM app, and we will go through them at the end of the session. And that's it from my part, and I leave the stage to you, Lotta.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, Sophie and ITAKOM. I'm very happy to be here, very honored to be here. I have quite some couple of minutes here to talk about a huge. It's sexuality and love, and you know, it's concerned everyone. All of us have experiences and attitudes towards the subject, and I will try to give you an insight into the heterogeneous group of young people with intellectual disabilities. And I will just address the fact that this group are so varied and have so many differences within the group. So when you hear me talk about this subject, please remember that they are all individuals and persons. And you can see here, I just put some pics here to show you the varieties concerning gender, and also these are young people, but the whole group, of course, are ages, gender, sexual identities, and also social class, ethnicity. And these kind of varieties are, of course, kind of complicated to address today, but I would try to give you an insight. I will also try to say something very brief about consequences of an intellectual disability when it comes to relations to sexuality. You can see here that it's different levels of, you can see here, limited abstraction, verbal, and communication ability. And these limitations are from the ones who doesn't have a verbal language and to the ones who have a verbal language, but maybe not understand the consequences or the full meaning of the word. So in that way, you can say that communication abilities are very varied. And you can also see that there are limited possibilities to understand sexual norms and sexual codes. And a lot of things concerning sexuality are underlying sentence, you know, between sentences, and also between the thing that we say and the way we act, and also the art of flirting. So I will come back to these kind of codes and norms and attitudes that all of us learn about sexuality from that we're born. And you can also see that there are limited knowledge about sexuality, and I will tell you one reason, or at least two reasons, why it is so important for us to talk more about sexuality and also to address the relevance of the people who really want and need to talk about these things. So it's not about the surroundings needs, it's about the persons with the intellectual disabilities needs. Also, there are limited knowledge about the body, and we know that because their sex education is limited. So again, it's not only about the disability itself, It's about the surroundings norms and attitudes and the way that we treat the subject and the way that school also address sexuality education. I will come back to that too. And also about relationships. And you can see, if you are in a need of a long life-lasting need of other people's support, other people's believing and thoughts about what's the best for you, then it becomes complicated because you're both in the situation and position of asking for help, for support, but the person who helps you are also in the need of knowing more about what kind of support you're supposed to give to a person. So I will also try to give you some insight about the staff members' attitudes, but also something about the parents' situation and what it means to have a kid, a child, a teenager, a young adult, an adult with an intellectual disability, and the importance of how to kind of stretch out that kind of dependency situation and how you can deal with that very often tight relationship between parents and people with intellectual disability. And this last thing is very important. I talk about they and them and their options and their limitations. But remember, a lot of people that I talk to, they want to be like everybody else. Everybody else. And we have talked a lot about feelings of exclusions and feelings of not being normal. I heard a lot of speeches yesterday, and I was just thinking about these people that I have met who have learned me so much about what's mean to be a human person, about the condition of being here for a short time on earth and being in such an independence situation for me, so that I have not an intellectual disability, but for these people, how do you deal with a dependency situation? So this is very, very important. When I was talking and preparing for this speech, I was thinking back of the historical and the societal context. I think I've been working with these issues for like 30 or 35 years now. And I started out as a school counselor, actually one of the first school counselors in Sweden when the societal norms had changed and we had reforms that was into more of living like everybody else. And I saw Åke Larsson here, and I think we met maybe 20 years ago for the first time. So this is also a way for me to put together and conclude a lot of things, thinking back of the historical and societal context. And I can also tell you, when I was a young school counselor at special schools, that was the first generation that grew up together with the parents and with the siblings within villas and apartments, just like everybody else. That was the first time. The generation before that, they grew up on huge institutions, one-gender institutions. And also, as you can see, the societal attitudes were quite restrictive, quite negative. And also, there were forced sterilizations, and also the thinking of how to control vulnerable people's sexuality. So this has in one way been changed from this kind of attitudes that this group of people was seen as either non-gendered or asexual without a sexuality, like children. They was thinking that children didn't have a sexuality back then. And on the other hand, to hypersexual people that was in need of control. So these kind of big, huge generalizations were also seen as important then to have within these institutions. Then, back in the 60s or in the 70s, that was the first time that Sweden, as well as the other Scandinavian countries, they were thinking, now we have to change this kind of societal reforms. And we were talking about integration, we were talking about normalization, and we also talked about autonomy, self-dependency. How can I live my life the way I want to do it? So we have had these years that changed totally, I would say, the life conditions for this group of people. But not totally, really. When it comes to sexuality, when it comes to private life, there are still unmet needs. And you can see that the sheltered social world that many people think that they have to live in, or maybe the parents and the staff members that really was worried about unwanted pregnancies or sexual harassments and sexual exploration or sexual harassment. And this is important because staff members and parents, they really want to do the best for their kid, for their students, and they do this for goodwill. But the consequence is that the persons with an intellectual disability feel that they don't really know, who am I? What do I want? What do I want with my life, with my sexuality? And what is the goodwill from the surrounding? So nowadays, you can see in one way, a lot of things have changed. We live in Malmö, in the city where I live, in southern Sweden. We have a multicultural society. We have like 188 nationalities within our city. And you can see there's a lot of languages. There is a lot of also contradictory and parallel sexual norms. And these norms concerns the views of abortions, divorces, homosexual, sex before marriage, and so on. And they are completely different. And that means that everyone had to navigate between these parallel contradictory norms. And you can see why people with intellectual disabilities have more challenges to do that. But there are also contradictory norms concerning disability. Some cultures see when you get a child with disability as a blessing, and others think it's a shame. And all these contradictory norms are so complicated for everyone. And again, then it becomes more complicated if you have an intellectual disability. We also have this big, huge change since the 1990s, I think we could say, that the digital society, the internet, and all these changes when it comes to new meeting places for love, new meeting places for sexuality, the easy access of pornography, and also online dating, but also romantic frauds, sexual harassment again. It's another area, once again, that is complicated and we talk about a lot in Sweden. But do we talk about it enough when it comes to people with intellectual disabilities? I would say no. The last study I did on the internet and young people with intellectual disabilities, they said that it's online. That's the place where they got abused. So how to navigate between these complex aspects are really, really important things. And you also have to think about what kind of knowledge are you going to address, what kind of knowledge are you going to disseminate within this group, and from whose perspective. All these challenges from today are, of course, something that we all have to deal with. And I just wanted to show you a picture. I did like this. When it comes to sexuality, you usually say that sexuality is something private. You're supposed to behave sexual behind the curtain. I kind of put this as a symbol for privacy. And you have to do some things on stage. When you are a kid, you learn what to do on stage. This is from Goffman, the sociologist Irving Goffman. He talked about the life as a theater, that you have like a manuscript. You know, you have to learn how to act private, and you have to learn how to act in public. And this is small signals how to do it. This is like something you really don't even know when you learned it and how you learned it. So you have like a manuscript of how to show your sexual behavior or conduct, and you have to show it in a socially accepted way. And when you have a dependency situation, when you have a disability, you need help and support from other people. You might even need it within your private phase. And you can see, if you think like this, this is your private situation, and here you go out in public and you have a speech. And if you need help here, then it's not private anymore. So then it becomes a transformation of sexuality. That means that you don't have the private place to show sexuality in a socially accepted way. And that means without a privacy, your sexuality gets transformed into something public and then into something abnormal. And that also means if you don't know that much about sexual behavior, sexual conduct, because usually people only know about their own references. They have their own experiences, and we might learn and read about sexuality in the newspapers or in the books, but usually you read about it in a way that it's difficult to really open up your references and to really open up and to see the variety of sexual conduct. Because society has shown us like a norm for what's normal and not normal. We will show that again, that in Sweden, just as in many, I would say most countries in the world, we look at heterosexual sexuality as the most normal way of behaving. And also we look at sexuality towards another person, and we don't talk enough about our own sexuality. And this is also important because if you are in need of other people, you are in need of staff members, you are in need of parents, and then they don't really recognize the way the person with intellectual disability show their sexuality. In that case, you can get the sense that, that's the way people with intellectual disability act sexually. But it might not be true at all. It might be just that person or just those persons, but not the whole group. So the variety, the heterogeneous varieties of the group is very important. Usually when I conduct research, I conduct qualitative interviews. I've been studying also dances for people geared towards people with intellectual disabilities. And then you can see the social norms concerning what to do and how to do. And one way of understanding this is to use the theoretical framework of sexual scripts. And this is, you can call it like a time-typical cultural and societal norm, a kind of manuscript, a sexual manuscript. And Gagnon and Simon, they said that every culture has the answer of these questions. Who is allowed to have sexual intercourse? And I have to admit that I changed the sentence, you can see here, because I would like to have the phrasing of who is allowed to have a sexuality, because then you can see that you can have it by yourself, not only together with other person. So who is allowed to? What is acceptable? When is it right? Where is it allowed? And why do people have asexuality? So this who, what, when, where, and with whom are questions that actually get different answers depending on the target group. And this is also very important and interesting to reflect concerning the answers. Because if I ask staff members to think about people with intellectual disabilities, then the answers get more restrictive, more negative, more focused on problems and risks. And we talk about young people in general, then it gets more into positive aspects of sexuality, more into possibilities with sexuality, and more about intimacy and lust and desire and so on. But when you talk about this target group, then it becomes much more problem-oriented. So this is a way of thinking, what is my sexual script? What is my upbringing? What have my upbringing learned me about sexuality? And in what way should my sexual script influence on other people's sexual life? So this is a way of becoming more professional, or as a parent, becoming more aware of the way I act, the way I conduct my questions or my behavior towards other people. So try to think about that after this speech today. What's your sexual script? So when it comes to sexual conduct and sexual experiences, I've done these qualitative interviews with young people. I've asked them, but I've also been a participant observer, we call it, when you're together with people and you not only ask them, but you are together and learn about them and learn from them. And so far, I can see that experiences of sexuality with yourself is the most common way of acting sexually. And again, if the norm is heterosexual, if the norm is sexual intercourse, you can see immediately that this group is then becoming stigmatized if they show sexuality in a way that we are not used to see or used to talk about. But also there are experiences of hugs and kisses and caresses and petting, and some people talk about they have experiences of sexual intercourse. But again, we really don't know, because you remember the curtain, if you don't have a private space, where should you then conduct sexual activities that are permitted, that are sexually accepted and socially accepted? So everything that I say, be aware of it, that it might be changing. I was thinking about Pelle yesterday. He said that the professors had always right, and I would say on the contrary, because we don't really know. I would say that we have maybe right for 3%. But we can see, and this is also, of course, something that we should not ignore, that there are research that talk about comprehensive experiences of sexual assaults. This is foremost among females, but also among males. But I cannot let you, you have to see this too, because Swedish youth also talk a lot about pleasure and a lot about positive experiences. So what I was thinking, how do researchers frame their questions? So when you see this kind of results, remember that it also depends on how you ask people and what you ask them and when you ask them. But again, you can see that this online world also means that a lot of people are being sexually abused or harassed on the internet. But these people also say, well, I have these negative experiences outside the internet as well. So it's not only online, but of course, the internet is a place where a lot of things can happen, kind of private, behind the curtain. And this change with cell phones, and you have the internet on your pocket, yes, of course, it's not that easy for parents, it's not that easy for staff members to check everything, as you could do before when you have a family computer in the middle of the room. So here is an area that we have to talk more about. And I've said before, it's a heterosexual and gender stereotyped social world. And it's also because of the societal norms we talked about before, the reforms about the normalization. It has a kind of inbuilt stereotyped conception of gender. And I would say that a lot of people that I talked to, staff members, they said, well, it's not that I'm against homosexual people, it's just that I wish that if they already have an intellectual disability, then they don't have to be homosexuals as well. It becomes too much. So they don't want them to deviate from the norm. So this is one thing. How can you have role models? How can you find yourself? How can you have a chance to see what is my sexual identity? What is my way of living? How do I want to live my life? When other people think that I should keep within this norm, even more than other people. And interestingly enough, you can see that young Swedish females, they take more initiative. They are more active than young males. And one reason that we as researchers think it could be because young males, they've heard, don't do that against women. You have to be careful. Please don't do anything to a woman that she doesn't want to. And then the young female said, well, the young guys, they never do anything. They don't dare to do anything. They are too shy, so I have to do something. So we can see, in one way, it's a vulnerable new generation of males that are growing up now. So in Sweden, we're also talking about young guys who have to be more in support for their masculinity and not only support females, to support both males and females. So we actually talk about the gender paradox in Sweden. And this is also concerning this group of young people. But as a consequence, again, we can see it seems to be quite uncommon, unusual for young people with intellectual disabilities to come out as LGBTQ plus persons. And again, the arenas also for the dances geared toward this target group are quite gender typical. So you're supposed to dance as a female with a male. And when two guys are dancing together, then staff members said, well, can't you dance with that girl over there? Well, should I do that? And you see, the young guys are insecure. And they're not only insecure about the when, where, and with whom, and why. They are actually insecure about if their sexuality is allowed. So we think that this is an important thing to look more at the sexual interplay between young people and to also support the variety of acting and conducting sexual behavior and social behavior. And as long as we have this lack of privacy, this lack of private arenas, then there are limited options to show sexuality in a way that is socially accepted. So we have to think about that. How can we make more privacy possible? And in that way, you can also see, if you go for a dance in general, you have the option to go home with someone or to take a new partner and to kiss and to caress and to maybe go outside the dance hall. But here, you're supposed to be within the room where the music is playing and where there are staff members and where they are serving coffee or tea or soda and so on. So you don't really have the option to go away for private meetings. So this kind of restrictive sexual script, when you're unsecure about if sexuality is allowed, that also makes you certain limitations with you as a person. And when I ask these young people, what do you want to do as a grown-up? How do you want to live your life? And they say, well, I would love to have a partner, but it's very complicated to get one. Can you tell me how I should do? Where should I meet someone? And when I take home a boyfriend or a partner or a girlfriend, then my parents come and say, don't open the door, don't lock the door, come out here and drink coffee with us. So it's very difficult, again, to have this privacy. And when I ask them about parenthood, and I ask them, do you want to have a baby, or what do you think about being a parent? Mostly they say, well, I don't think I can handle to have a kid because it's so complicated. It's so complicated with the weather, for example. How can I know how the weather should be the whole day? What to put on the kids in the morning? Maybe it's going to rain. Should I put on rain clothes in the morning or not? So most of them say, well, I don't think I can handle having a baby. But then a few, they say, yes, I really, really would like to have a baby. I really, really would like to be a parent. And then they meet maybe someone without an intellectual disability or that haven't had the diagnosis with intellectual disability and get a kid. And then they say, I don't dare to ask for help because then they maybe take the kid from me. And we know that not asking for help is a very, very vulnerable part of being a parent. You need to ask for help, and that goes for everyone. So this is also important to talk about, and to actually talk about the complexity of parenthood. And then, when all these young people say, I would love to have a partner, but how shall I get a partner? So then we have to talk about the act of flirting, the art of flirting, and the love ideology. And that means that it is complex, and it's very difficult to really know how to flirt. And it's complex and difficult also to know how you can do this in the right way for the staff members. And love is also a way of having a reason for having a sexuality. For example, I remember one guy at the dance, and he went out of the room, and then he came back and he said, I asked her if I could touch her breast, and she said no. And then I said, I love you, can I touch your breast? Yes. So, you have to know how to deal with this, and you know how to do it in the right way concerning the social norms. But the result is that mostly adults with intellectual disability, they live as singles. So it's not really the same as everybody else. And here is another study that we conducted, and that was concerning the internet and participation on the internet. And here we can again see that internet and social media today, of course, it is an integrated part of everyday life. for young people with intellectual disabilities, just as well as for everyone. But we can see that there is strong ambivalence among staff members and also parents and family members. And they always say, internet for better or for worse. Because in one way, this is good. It opens up for new contacts, more contacts, and people who are socially isolated can get new friends, and they can kind of reach out their arenas to meet more people. But of course, it is a risk. And you can see that the surrounding, they focus on the risk for grooming and for sexual harassment again, and for frauds. So that's their point of view of the risks. But the youth themselves, they say, well, the biggest risk is that I'll be disappointed again. They say that there are so many partners out there on the internet, and I'm so afraid that I don't find anyone here either. So you can see that they talk about risk in a completely different way from different angles. And also when I ask the young people, are you about the risk? They say that they're aware of the risks, but they don't act from them. And for example, if the staff members say, you have to meet a partner in real life on a cafe, on a neutral place. But then they say, well, I want to kiss my date. And I'm not supposed to do it in public. I'm supposed to do it in private place. That's why I take home the new date back home. So it's kind of logical why you act in a different way that the netiquette rules say. And here, again, is one big track of my research from the beginning until now. It concerns sex education, because all this that I've been talking about is about sex education. And we can see this subject has been compulsory in Sweden since 1955 for all schools, from low school up to the highest grade. And we have had compulsory sex education for so many years, and we are so proud of it in Sweden. But still, sex education in special schools are seen as irrelevant or rare. And this is the point of view from the pupils at special schools. So how come? And then staff members said, well, this is much more complicated to teach sex education in special schools because the group is so heterogeneous, as we have said before, and also because we are afraid that they cannot deal with it. So in what way should we talk about these aspects and issues when the verbal abilities are so different within the group, and the capacities of reflecting and discussing are so huge variety in the group. And there are no books, they say, and no material. But again, then they focus on sexually transmitted diseases and contraception and intercourse. And we know that for now, that these are not things that are seen as relevant for this group of people, because they want to know, how can I get a partner? I want to know how my body is functioning. I want to know more about sexual norms. I want to know more about all these kind of options. How will I get a privacy, a social arena for sexuality? And this means that this heteronormative perspective, it actually will diminish other sexual experiences or sexual identities. So it becomes contradictory for the goals of sex education in Sweden. Now we have this big change, and some of you already know that, but last year we changed the name of sex education in Sweden. We changed it into sexuality, consent, and relationships. And this is for everyone. And this is very, very important, because one reason for this is that we live in this multicultural society We have all these contradictory norms that we talked about before, and we really need to have young people to discuss more about consent and to make conscious decisions about their lives and have more reflection. We have to talk more about how to navigate between all these different kind of norms and different kind of socially and cultural norms. And this is also true for people in special schools. And how can you do that then? We talk about the norm critical perspective. That's one way of doing it. To have staff members to talk about and learn more, to open up for a variety of sexual pleasure, sexual conduct, sexual identities, and sexual lifestyles. We also need to challenge these gender stereotype views. We have to put the same effort into boys and girls and to transgender persons and different kind of sexual identities. We have to open up more, listen more, and reflect more. And not least, we have to focus sexual pleasure, and it will be based on the people's own conditions, their own possibilities and options, and what they want about life. So this is, in one way, a way of really challenge the whole discourse that focuses the heterosexual penetration norm. When I work within WHO, we talked about sexual and reproductive health and rights. And we talk about that for everyone. And nowadays we talk about it as a way of developing societies into more economical, secure societies. So interestingly enough, if you put the effort into groups that are more vulnerable, then you get a growth within the whole social welfare system. And this is one way of doing it for this target group. So, when we talk about conclusions then, we begin with saying that there are still unmet needs. You can conclude that, yes, there is still a restrictive sexual script that focuses more on risk than on intimacy and the positive aspects of sexuality. And yes, in this case, you really have to educate staff members in special schools, and also in a way then to reach the young people with intellectual disability. But not least, you have to support parents to embrace the fact that you have a kid that is special, that have these special needs, but also to support them to live an independent life. And this is a way that staff members and parents can work together. And not least, offer the young people with intellectual disability education on their premises. What are their interests? What do they want to know more about? What do they want to discuss? What do they want to reflect on? And to open up this norm-critical view that actually is a way of open up for sexual and gender varieties. And I would like to stress the fact that having a dialogue, it's not only staff members and parents that are going to teach and learn young people with intellectual disability what they should know. It's to open up to see, what can I learn? What can I learn more about how to live? What's important in life? And in that way, it really is a dialogue between the surroundings and the persons with intellectual disabilities. And to sum up, I would like also to say that for me, being nowadays a researcher, I would say that this is one of the most important areas for me, growing as a researcher, but also growing as a human being, as a female, as a person. Everything that I've learned from these persons during these 35 years. So I think we should bring that thought back to Sweden, because I was thinking about the guy and a girl that I met, and they said to me, wherever you go into the world, just tell the people that we are important, that we want to live our life in the way that we really decide. Not anyone else should decide over me. I want to decide myself. And if we can try to be there to support and to balance the support with this openness for learning more ourselves and not thinking they and we, to think this is actually about everyone. This is about the condition of love and sexuality where no one is an expert. And I would say, even though I am a professor in sexology, I'm not an expert. So I think we have the opportunity in that case to some questions, and I would like to thank you very much. Thank you.
Tusen tack, Lotta. And we have one question here, and we have 1 minute, so I think that's quite a good match. So the question is, what are your views on sex surrogacy for those with intellectual disability?
Sorry, can you repeat it? What are your...
Surrogacy.
Sex...
Surrogacy.
Sex surrogate for... Well, that's a complex question too. So that's why I was just double checking, because that's almost 2 questions within one, I would say. To be a sex surrogate, yeah. We have a researcher in Sweden in my research group that are actually conducting research on that. But that also contains so much about how to look on different countries, because in Sweden, in that case, we do it from other persons in other countries. So I would say it's difficult for me to start that discussion right now. If it's okay to keep that off now, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.